Chosen one. There are seasons in life when the things that once made you feel safe begin to shift. Relationships that once felt steady start changing in subtle ways. Conversations that used to feel warm begin to feel distant. Opportunities you once relied on quietly close without clear explanation. Even the routines that once gave you peace no longer carry the same sense of security they once did. At first, this kind of shift can feel deeply confusing. You may find yourself asking questions that seem to have no immediate answers. Why is everything changing at the same time? Why does the environment that once supported you now feel unstable? Why do the things that once felt certain now feel uncertain? For many chosen ones, this season arrives without warning. Nothing dramatic may happen at first. Instead, it begins with small disruptions that slowly accumulate. The places that once felt familiar begin to feel restrictive. The paths that once seemed clear start to lose their direction. It may feel as if the ground beneath your life is quietly moving. During moments like these, it is easy to believe that something has gone wrong. You might assume that you made a mistake somewhere along the way, or that you were losing control of the stability you worked hard to build. Yet, throughout spiritual history, many individuals who were called to something greater experienced the same moment. The moment when the comfort that surrounded them began to fade. Comfort has a quiet power. When life feels stable and predictable, it creates a sense of safety that encourages us to remain where we are. Familiar routines become comfortable shelters. Known environments become places where we feel protected from uncertainty. There is nothing inherently wrong with comfort, but sometimes it becomes the very thing that keeps a person from stepping into a larger purpose. For the chosen one, growth rarely happens inside a permanent comfort zone. There are times when God allows stability to remain for a season, so that strength can develop quietly. But there are also moments when that stability must shift. When preparation reaches a certain point, the environment that once supported you may begin to change, so that movement becomes unavoidable. What once felt permanent may begin to feel temporary. Doors that once stayed open may close without explanation. Certain relationships may begin drifting in unexpected directions. Even your own perspective may begin to shift in ways that make the old path feel smaller than it once did. None of this means that you are being abandoned. In many cases, it means that something deeper is taking place beneath the surface of your life. When comfort begins to disappear, it can be a signal that preparation is entering a new stage. The removal of what once felt safe may be creating the space needed for something greater to emerge. This message explores why this happens and what it means when comfort begins to disappear from the life of a chosen one. If this message speaks to you, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who may be walking through a similar season, and subscribe to the channel for more messages about the journey of the chosen ones. Comfort often creates the illusion that life will remain the same indefinitely. When everything around you appears steady and predictable, it is easy to believe that the structure of your life has reached its final form. Days begin to follow familiar patterns. The same people surround you. The same places greet you each morning. Over time, this repetition quietly convinces the mind that what exists now will continue existing tomorrow in exactly the same way. For many chosen ones, this sense of stability becomes the background of their early journey. They build routines that give their days order and meaning. They develop relationships that appear dependable and supportive. They settle into environments that feel secure and manageable. Each piece slowly becomes part of a system that seems strong enough to last indefinitely. From the outside, these structures often look like permanent foundations. A career path may appear stable. A circle of friends may seem reliable. A community may feel like the place where life will unfold for many years to come. These elements combine to form a picture of security that feels reassuring and predictable. Yet what many people eventually discover is that stability can sometimes be an illusion rather than a permanent reality. The routines we build are not always designed to last forever. The environments that support us during one season of life may not be capable of supporting us during the next. Even relationships that once felt unshakable may begin to shift as personal growth moves in new directions. For the chosen one, this realization often arrives gradually. At first, the changes may be subtle. Something about the familiar routine begins to feel slightly out of place. The conversations that once felt natural may start to feel strained. The path that once seemed obvious may begin to raise quiet questions in the mind. These small signals are easy to ignore at first. Most people instinctively hold on to what feels stable. When life appears secure, there is little reason to question the foundation beneath it. The human instinct is to preserve the environment that provides comfort and predictability. However, the journey of the chosen one rarely follows a path of permanent comfort. The reason is simple but profound. A life that is meant to grow into something greater cannot remain locked inside the same environment forever. What once supported growth can eventually begin to limit it. Imagine a seed that begins its life inside a small container. At first, the container is exactly what the seed needs. It provides protection, stability, and the conditions necessary for the first stages of development. But as the plant grows stronger, the container that once protected it eventually becomes too small to hold its expanding roots. The same principle applies to many seasons of life. What once felt like the perfect environment can eventually become restrictive. The routines that once supported growth can slowly become patterns that limit exploration. The familiar surroundings that once provided security can quietly begin to hold a person back from the next stage of their journey. This is where the illusion of stability begins to reveal itself. What once appeared permanent begins to show signs of movement. Situations that once felt solid begin to feel uncertain. The environment that once felt perfectly aligned begins to feel slightly out of step with who you are becoming. For many chosen ones, this moment can feel unsettling. Stability has a powerful psychological effect. It creates a sense of control over the future. When routines are predictable and relationships feel steady, the mind feels safe planning years ahead. When that stability begins to shift, the mind often interprets the change as a threat. Questions begin to surface. Why are things changing? Why does the environment feel different now? Why do opportunities that once seemed secure suddenly begin to disappear? Yet from a spiritual perspective, these shifts are often not signs of failure or loss. Instead, they can be signals that life is entering a new stage of development. When God begins preparing someone for a larger purpose, the illusion of permanence often begins to fade. This does not usually happen through one dramatic event. Instead, the change often unfolds through a series of quiet adjustments. Certain opportunities may begin to close. Certain relationships may drift apart. Certain routines may begin to lose their meaning or sense of direction. At first, these changes can feel uncomfortable. The mind naturally resists uncertainty. It prefers the safety of familiar patterns, even if those patterns no longer support growth. But the removal of old structures can create the space needed for something new to emerge. Many chosen ones later look back at these moments and recognize that the changes were not random. What once appeared to be disruption was actually preparation. The structures that once supported them had simply completed their purpose. Every season of life carries its own assignments. Some seasons are meant for learning, others are meant for building strength. Still others are meant for developing awareness and discernment. The environment that supports one assignment may not be suitable for the next. When a chosen one approaches the threshold of a new season, the environment around them often begins to shift accordingly. The illusion of permanence dissolves so that movement becomes possible. Without this shift, it would be easy to remain indefinitely in a space that no longer aligns with the future that is being prepared. It is important to understand that this process does not mean that the previous season was meaningless. The routines, relationships, and environments that once surrounded you may have played an essential role in shaping your character and understanding. They may have provided lessons that could only be learned within that specific setting. But no season is meant to last forever. Even the most stable environments are temporary stages within a larger journey. The illusion of stability often fades precisely when its purpose has been fulfilled. For the chosen one, recognizing this truth can bring a new level of clarity. What once appeared to be a sudden loss of security may actually be the beginning of transformation. The fading of old stability may be the signal that preparation is complete and that a new path is beginning to open. When life begins to feel uncertain after a long season of stability, it does not necessarily mean that something has gone wrong. Sometimes it simply means that the foundations that once supported you are no longer meant to hold you in place. The illusion of stability fades so that growth can continue. And for the chosen one, that moment often marks the quiet beginning of a much larger journey. As the illusion of stability begins to fade, many chosen ones start to notice something they had not fully seen before. The environment that once felt secure may have also been quietly limiting. The routines that once felt peaceful may have slowly reduced the urgency to grow. What once appeared to be a place of safety may have also been a place where movement slowed down. This realization does not mean that stability itself was wrong. Comfort, in many ways, is a natural and necessary part of life. Seasons of rest allow the mind and spirit to recover. Familiar environments can provide protection, while a person develops strength and understanding. In many cases, comfort is part of the preparation process itself. Yet there is an important distinction between comfort that restores strength and comfort that quietly delays purpose. When comfort becomes too permanent, it can create an invisible boundary around a person's potential. Life becomes predictable, and with predictability comes the temptation to remain exactly where things feel easiest. For the chosen one, this stage can last for years without being fully recognized. A routine forms that feels stable and manageable. Days follow a familiar rhythm that requires little risk and little change. There is no immediate crisis forcing a decision, and because there is no pressure to move forward, growth begins to slow. Human nature naturally gravitates toward environments that feel secure. When life feels easy and predictable, there is little reason to question whether the current path is the final one. The mind begins to assume that stability is proof that everything is aligned correctly. However, purpose often requires movement beyond what feels comfortable. A calling that carries deeper meaning rarely unfolds within the exact same conditions that existed before the calling was recognized. New responsibilities, new levels of influence, and new spiritual awareness often require environments that challenge a person to grow. When comfort becomes the dominant force in life, it can quietly postpone this transition. The chosen one may continue living within an environment that feels safe, but no longer stimulates growth. Opportunities that could lead to transformation may be ignored simply because they introduce uncertainty. Comfort can also create subtle distractions. When life is easy, the urgency to examine deeper questions becomes weaker. The mind focuses on maintaining the current level of stability rather than exploring what might exist beyond it. Spiritual reflection becomes less frequent. Faith may remain present, but it is no longer tested or strengthened through challenge. In these moments, the chosen one may not even realize that their progress has slowed. Everything appears normal on the surface. There is no visible crisis. Life continues moving in familiar patterns, and those patterns feel safe enough to maintain. Yet beneath the surface, something important may be missing. Growth requires friction. Understanding deepens when circumstances force reflection. Faith strengthens when it must be exercised in uncertain situations. Without these pressures, development can quietly stagnate. This is often the point where change begins to appear in ways that seem confusing at first. The comfort that once surrounded the chosen one begins to shift. Situations that once felt stable begin to change. Certain opportunities may disappear. Certain relationships may begin to distance themselves. The routine that once felt secure may begin to feel incomplete. From a human perspective, these changes can feel like disruptions. The mind may interpret them as losses or setbacks. It is natural to wonder why something that once worked so well no longer feels stable. But from a spiritual perspective, the removal of comfort can serve a different purpose. Sometimes God allows certain forms of comfort to fade, not because they were harmful, but because they had already fulfilled their role. What once protected growth can eventually begin to slow it. In these moments, the removal of comfort becomes an invitation to look deeper. Without the familiar distractions that once filled the day, the chosen one begins to notice questions that were previously ignored. What direction should life take next? What purpose has been quietly waiting beneath the surface? What possibilities exist beyond the routine that once defined the path forward? The absence of ease creates space for reflection. When the predictable structure of life begins to loosen, awareness often grows stronger. The chosen one begins to examine decisions more carefully. The voice of intuition becomes clearer. Spiritual sensitivity increases because there are fewer distractions competing for attention. This stage is not always comfortable, but it can be profoundly transformative. When the mind can no longer rely on familiar patterns for security, it begins searching for deeper guidance. Faith that once existed quietly in the background becomes something that must now be actively practiced. Stronger faith rarely develops in environments where everything remains easy. It grows through moments when answers are not immediately visible. It deepens when a person must trust that there is meaning behind the changes taking place, even when the full picture has not yet been revealed. For the chosen one, this process gradually creates a willingness to move forward. The attachment to the old comfort zone begins to weaken. What once felt safe may begin to feel restrictive. The desire to understand the deeper purpose behind life becomes stronger than the desire to preserve the old routine. This shift in perspective is often the beginning of transformation. What started as the loss of comfort slowly becomes the discovery of direction. The chosen one begins to see that ease was never meant to be permanent. It was only one stage within a much larger journey. Sometimes the removal of comfort is not meant to create suffering at all. Instead, it removes the distractions that once made it easy to ignore deeper questions. When those distractions fade, clarity becomes possible. The chosen one begins to move with greater awareness. Decisions become more intentional, faith becomes more active, and the willingness to step beyond familiar boundaries begins to grow stronger with each passing season. In this way, what once appeared to be a disruption can become the very force that moves a person closer to their true purpose. As the season of comfort begins to fade and reflection deepens, another stage often emerges in the journey of the chosen one. What began as a quiet shift in stability can eventually develop into disruptions that feel far more personal. The environment that once felt secure may no longer remain intact. Situations that once appeared stable may begin to dissolve in ways that seem sudden or unexpected. This is often the moment when the removal of comfort no longer feels subtle. Instead, it begins to feel like loss. When comfort disappears, the experience rarely arrives in a form that immediately looks meaningful or purposeful. It often appears through circumstances that feel painful or confusing. A job that once seemed reliable may suddenly come to an end. A relationship that once offered companionship may slowly grow distant. A familiar environment may begin to feel unfamiliar, as if the sense of belonging that once existed has quietly faded. These disruptions can feel deeply personal. It is natural for the mind to search for explanations. Questions begin to surface that are difficult to answer in the moment. Why did this happen now? Why did something that seemed stable suddenly change? Why did something meaningful come to an end? For the chosen one, these questions can create an emotional weight that is difficult to carry at first. Loss has a way of forcing the mind to confront uncertainty. The future that once seemed predictable now appears unclear. The structure that once provided direction may no longer exist. In these moments, it is easy to interpret disruption as failure. The loss of stability can make a person feel as if something has gone wrong. The mind may begin reviewing past decisions, wondering whether a different choice could have prevented the situation from unfolding this way. Yet what many chosen ones later discover is that the experience of loss is often only one part of a larger transformation. What appears to be an ending may actually be a separation from circumstances that were never meant to support the next stage of growth. When a season of life has fulfilled its purpose, it sometimes closes in ways that feel abrupt. The structures that once supported development may quietly lose their ability to sustain further progress. What once felt aligned may begin to drift away because it no longer fits the direction that life is moving toward. At the time, this shift can feel confusing. Human perception tends to focus on what has been removed rather than what may be forming ahead. The absence of something familiar creates a space that feels empty, and emptiness often feels uncomfortable. But that empty space can serve a purpose. When certain structures disappear, they create room for something new to emerge. Without that separation, the chosen one might remain connected to circumstances that limit the next stage of growth. Consider how many people remain in environments simply because those environments feel familiar. A job may continue for years, even if it no longer inspires growth. A relationship may persist, even when it quietly restricts personal development. An environment may remain comfortable, even if it slowly discourages exploration. Familiarity has a powerful influence on human behavior. Even when a situation is no longer aligned with personal growth, the comfort of what is known can make it difficult to leave. The fear of uncertainty often feels stronger than the desire for change. This is one reason why the removal of comfort can feel so disruptive. It interrupts patterns that might otherwise continue indefinitely. It separates the chosen one from environments that could quietly delay the unfolding of their purpose. In the moment, however, that separation rarely looks beneficial. It often looks like loss. When a relationship begins to distance itself, it can feel as if something meaningful has been taken away. When a career path suddenly changes direction, it can feel as though years of effort have been erased. When an environment that once felt welcoming begins to feel closed off, it can create a sense of displacement. Yet many chosen ones eventually look back on these moments with a very different perspective. What once felt like the removal of something valuable sometimes turns out to be the removal of something limiting. Certain environments can only support a specific stage of life. Once that stage is complete, remaining within that environment may quietly restrict further growth. The same structure that once helped a person develop may eventually begin holding them back. This does not mean that the previous season was meaningless. Every stage of life carries lessons that shape understanding and strengthen character. The experiences that occurred within those environments may have been necessary for the development that was taking place at the time. But growth often requires movement beyond what is familiar. When the chosen one begins approaching a new level of awareness, responsibility, or purpose, the circumstances that once surrounded them may no longer be able to contain that transformation. What appears to be disruption can therefore become a form of realignment. The separation from certain circumstances allows the chosen one to step away from patterns that no longer reflect who they are becoming. This realization rarely arrives immediately. In the early stages, loss still feels like loss. The emotions connected to change take time to process. The mind needs time to understand why certain endings occurred. Yet, as time passes, clarity often begins to appear. The chosen one may notice that the removal of certain situations opened unexpected paths. Opportunities that once seemed distant may begin to appear. New environments may emerge that align more closely with the direction their life is now taking. What once felt like an abrupt ending gradually reveals itself as a turning point. The disruption that felt like loss becomes the doorway into a new season. The separation that once felt painful becomes the distance needed to move toward a different future. And the chosen one begins to recognize that not every ending is meant to be resisted. Sometimes endings are simply the closing of a chapter that has already fulfilled its purpose. For the chosen one, understanding this truth can transform the way disruption is viewed. Instead of seeing change as a sign that something has gone wrong, it becomes possible to see it as a sign that something new is beginning to take shape. And often, it is only after the loss of what once felt comfortable that the next stage of the journey becomes visible. As time passes, and the chosen one begins reflecting on the disruptions that once felt like loss, another realization slowly begins to emerge. What initially appeared to be an unfortunate ending may carry a deeper purpose that was not visible in the moment. The distance created by those changes often reveals something that could not be clearly seen before. Certain environments that once felt comfortable may have contained influences that were quietly limiting growth. This is where the perspective of the chosen one begins to shift. What once felt like removal may also have been protection. In some situations, comfort hides dangers that are not immediately visible. Familiar environments have a way of lowering awareness. When people spend long periods within the same routines and relationships, the mind begins to assume that everything within that environment is safe and trustworthy. The familiarity itself creates a sense of confidence that discourages deeper examination. Yet not every comfortable environment is truly supportive of long-term growth. Some situations contain patterns that slowly shape behavior in ways that are difficult to recognize while still inside them. The influence of certain conversations, expectations, or social dynamics can quietly shape decisions over time. When these patterns become normal, they rarely appear harmful at first. An environment may feel friendly while still encouraging habits that weaken spiritual awareness. It may appear supportive while subtly discouraging deeper purpose. It may seem welcoming while quietly rewarding behaviors that keep a person from evolving. This is one of the reasons comfort can become so deceptive. Because the surroundings feel familiar, the mind stops questioning whether the environment still aligns with the direction life is meant to take. The chosen one may continue moving through daily routines without realizing that the environment itself is slowly shaping their perspective. Over time, certain patterns can become deeply embedded. People begin to mirror the expectations of those around them. Decisions begin to follow the same logic that the environment encourages. Even dreams and ambitions may gradually adjust themselves to match the limits of what the surrounding environment believes is possible. In many cases, this process happens without conscious awareness. No one intentionally decides to limit their own potential. Instead, the boundaries form slowly through repetition. The chosen one may simply adapt to the atmosphere that surrounds them, assuming that this environment represents the natural limits of what life can become. However, when a deeper purpose begins to awaken, that same environment may no longer feel aligned. The chosen one may start noticing subtle tensions within the routine that once felt comfortable. Conversations may feel different, expectations may begin to feel restrictive, the sense of belonging that once existed may begin to weaken. This shift often marks the beginning of separation. From a human perspective, the separation may appear unnecessary or even painful. The chosen one may wonder why circumstances are changing when everything seemed to be functioning normally. Yet sometimes, the change occurs precisely because everything appeared normal. An environment that quietly limits awareness is often most effective when it appears harmless. If the limitations were obvious, they would be easier to escape. But when they are hidden inside familiar routines, they can persist for years without being recognized. This is where the removal of comfort can become an act of protection. By shifting the chosen one away from familiar surroundings, the influence of those hidden patterns begins to weaken. Distance allows perspective to grow. What once felt normal can suddenly be seen from a different angle. With that distance, clarity often begins to appear. The chosen one may start recognizing habits or beliefs that were shaped by the previous environment. Certain attitudes that once felt natural may now seem misaligned with their deeper values. Conversations that once seemed harmless may reveal subtle negativity or discouragement that previously went unnoticed. None of this means that the previous environment was entirely harmful. Many environments serve a purpose during specific seasons of life. They may provide learning experiences, connections, or challenges that contribute to personal development. But every environment also carries its own limitations. The same atmosphere that supports one stage of growth may quietly resist the next. When a person begins moving toward a larger purpose, the environment around them must also evolve. If it cannot evolve, separation often becomes necessary. When God removes comfort, the shift may therefore serve as a form of guidance. By redirecting the chosen one away from familiar surroundings, the path forward becomes easier to see. Without the constant influence of the old environment, the chosen one gains space to develop new awareness. This clarity is rarely immediate. At first, the distance may feel disorienting. The routines that once structured daily life may no longer exist. The relationships that once filled conversations may no longer occupy the same space. The sense of belonging that once defined identity may temporarily disappear. Yet within that silence, something important begins to grow. The chosen one starts to rediscover their own voice. Without the constant influence of familiar expectations, new ideas begin to form. The direction of life begins to feel less constrained by external patterns and more guided by internal conviction. Spiritual awareness often becomes stronger during this stage. Without the distractions of an environment that once dominated attention, the chosen one begins to notice deeper questions about purpose and direction. The search for meaning becomes more focused. Faith becomes more active. What once appeared to be a disruption gradually reveals itself as a moment of protection. The chosen one begins to see that the removal of comfort did not occur randomly. It occurred at the moment when remaining in the same environment might have quietly prevented the next stage of growth from unfolding. Sometimes protection does not arrive in the form of obvious rescue. Sometimes it arrives through redirection. The path that once seemed stable is gently closed so that a new path can become visible. And while the separation from comfort may feel difficult in the moment, it often becomes clear with time that the distance created the freedom needed to move forward. As the chosen one begins to recognize that the removal of comfort may have carried hidden protection, another stage of the journey gradually unfolds. The distance from familiar environments creates clarity, but it also introduces a new reality that can feel unfamiliar and uncertain. The structures that once guided daily life are no longer present, and the path that lies ahead may not yet be clearly defined. This is the moment when many chosen ones enter what can only be described as a season of uncertainty. After comfort is removed, life rarely returns immediately to a new form of stability. Instead, there is often a period where the future appears open but undefined. The chosen one may sense that change has occurred for a reason, yet the full meaning of that change may still remain hidden. The old path has already closed, but the new one has not yet fully revealed itself. This stage can feel like walking through unfamiliar territory. The direction of life may no longer be mapped out in the way it once was. Decisions that once seemed simple may now require deeper thought. Situations that once provided clear expectations may now present multiple possibilities, none of which seem entirely certain. For the human mind, uncertainty can feel uncomfortable. Stability creates the illusion of control, while uncertainty introduces questions that cannot be answered immediately. The mind naturally prefers clarity. It wants to see where the road leads before taking the next step. But the journey of the chosen one rarely unfolds through complete visibility. Many of the most important transitions in life occur during moments when the path ahead is only partially revealed. Movement begins with trust rather than certainty. During this season, the chosen one may find themselves navigating decisions without the familiar markers that once provided reassurance. The routines that once defined daily life may no longer exist. The relationships that once provided guidance may now be distant. The future that once appeared predictable may now feel open and undefined. At first, this experience can create a sense of vulnerability. Without the structures that once provided direction, the chosen one may feel as though they are standing between two chapters of life. The previous season has already ended, but the next season has not yet fully begun. Yet within this space of uncertainty, something important begins to develop. When comfort disappears, distractions often disappear with it. The familiar routines that once filled every hour of the day may no longer occupy the same amount of attention. The expectations that once shaped decisions may begin to loosen their influence. The noise that once surrounded the chosen one gradually becomes quieter. In that quiet space, awareness begins to grow stronger. Without the constant presence of comfort, the chosen one becomes more attentive to subtle forms of guidance. Thoughts that once passed unnoticed may now carry greater meaning. Moments of reflection become more frequent. Questions about purpose and direction become deeper and more intentional. This stage often strengthens intuition. When the mind is no longer overwhelmed by predictable routines or external expectations, it becomes more capable of recognizing internal signals. The chosen one may begin noticing insights that appear unexpectedly during moments of silence or reflection. Faith also begins to develop in a new way during this season. When life feels predictable, faith can remain passive. It exists quietly in the background without being actively tested. But when uncertainty appears, faith becomes something that must be practiced in real time. Trust begins to replace certainty. The chosen one learns to move forward even when the full outcome is not yet visible. Decisions are no longer based solely on external structures, but also on internal conviction. This shift can feel uncomfortable at first, but it carries profound growth. Spiritual awareness rarely develops in environments where everything remains predictable. It grows when a person must learn to listen more carefully, reflect more deeply, and trust more intentionally. During this season, the chosen one may also begin noticing patterns that were previously hidden. Opportunities that once seemed insignificant may now reveal deeper meaning. Encounters with new people or environments may begin shaping a direction that was not visible before. Sometimes these signs appear gradually. A conversation may introduce an idea that begins changing perspective. A new opportunity may open a path that was never considered previously. A moment of quiet reflection may bring clarity about the direction life is meant to take. None of these moments may appear dramatic on their own, yet together they begin forming a new sense of direction. The season of uncertainty often teaches the chosen one an important lesson. Clarity does not always arrive all at once. Sometimes it appears step by step. Each movement forward reveals the next part of the path. The absence of comfort encourages this kind of awareness. When the chosen one can no longer rely on familiar routines for direction, attention naturally shifts toward deeper forms of guidance. The journey becomes less about maintaining stability and more about discovering purpose. Over time, the uncertainty that once felt intimidating begins to feel transformative. What initially seemed like a lack of direction slowly becomes a space where new possibilities emerge. The chosen one begins to realize that the open path ahead contains more potential than the closed path behind. This realization changes the way uncertainty is experienced. Instead of seeing it as a problem that must be solved immediately, it becomes a stage of growth that prepares the chosen one for what comes next. The season of uncertainty does not last forever, but it plays a crucial role in the journey. It teaches patience, strengthens faith, and deepens awareness. It creates the space where a new direction can gradually take shape. And as the chosen one continues moving forward through this unfamiliar territory, something else begins to develop quietly within them. A strength that did not exist before the comfort was removed. As the chosen one continues moving through the season of uncertainty, something subtle begins to change within them. The unfamiliar path that once felt overwhelming slowly becomes more navigable. The questions that once created hesitation begin to shape deeper reflection. Over time, the uncertainty that once seemed like a void begins to transform into a training ground. This transition marks the beginning of another important stage in the journey. What first appeared to be a period of instability gradually reveals a hidden purpose. The absence of comfort, the distance from familiar environments, and the need to navigate uncertainty all contribute to something that could not have been developed in the previous season. One of the hidden purposes behind the removal of comfort is the development of inner strength. When life is surrounded by stable routines and predictable support systems, much of a person's confidence is connected to those external structures. A reliable environment provides reassurance. Familiar relationships offer encouragement. Predictable outcomes reinforce the belief that things will continue moving in a manageable direction. But when those structures begin to shift, the chosen one can no longer rely on the same external anchors. The routines that once organized daily life may no longer exist. The voices that once offered constant affirmation may no longer be present. The environment that once created a sense of stability may have already faded into the past. At first, this transition can feel unsettling. The absence of familiar support often creates a moment where the chosen one must stand without the same level of external reassurance. The decisions that once depended on collective approval may now require independent judgment. Yet it is precisely within this moment that inner strength begins to develop. When external systems change, the chosen one begins to rely more heavily on internal conviction. The voice that guides decisions gradually shifts from external validation to deeper personal understanding. Instead of seeking constant reassurance from others, the chosen one begins to trust their own discernment. This shift does not happen instantly. It unfolds gradually through experience. Each challenge that is faced without the protection of familiar comfort becomes an opportunity to develop resilience. Each decision that must be made without complete certainty strengthens the ability to trust inner guidance. Resilience grows when a person continues moving forward, even when circumstances are uncertain. It develops through moments when the chosen one must remain steady, despite the absence of visible support. Over time, these experiences begin to form a quiet but powerful confidence. The chosen one begins to realize that their strength does not depend solely on the environment surrounding them. It also exists within their ability to adapt, reflect, and move forward regardless of changing circumstances. This realization creates a new foundation for decision-making. Choices become less influenced by the expectations of others and more aligned with internal clarity. The chosen one begins to recognize which paths genuinely support their growth and which ones do not. As this awareness deepens, boundaries naturally become stronger. When comfort once surrounded life, it may have been easier to tolerate environments that did not fully align with personal values. Familiarity sometimes makes it difficult to recognize when certain situations quietly limit growth. But after moving through uncertainty, the chosen one begins to see these dynamics more clearly. They become more selective about the environments they enter and the influences they allow into their life. Relationships that encourage growth are valued more deeply, while those that drain energy or discourage purpose become easier to distance from. This strengthening of boundaries is not driven by pride or isolation. Instead, it reflects a deeper understanding of what supports long-term growth. The chosen one learns that protecting their focus and spiritual awareness is essential to continuing the journey. Confidence also begins to change during this stage. In earlier seasons of life, confidence may have been connected to approval from others. Encouragement from friends, family, or colleagues often provided reassurance that the path being followed was correct. However, when comfort disappears and uncertainty takes its place, external validation becomes less reliable. The chosen one may need to make decisions that others do not fully understand. The direction that feels right internally may not always match the expectations of the surrounding environment. This is where confidence begins to evolve. Instead of relying on approval from others, it grows from experience. Each step forward through uncertainty reinforces the understanding that progress is possible even without universal agreement. The chosen one begins to recognize that strength does not come from avoiding difficulty. It comes from learning how to navigate difficulty with clarity and purpose. Every challenge faced during this season contributes to a deeper sense of self-trust. Faith also becomes stronger during this process. When life no longer provides constant reassurance through external stability, spiritual trust becomes more central. The chosen one begins to see that guidance can still appear even when the path is not fully visible. Moments of reflection, prayer, or quiet awareness often become more meaningful during this stage. The chosen one learns to listen more carefully to subtle forms of direction. What once required obvious signs may now be understood through smaller signals that were previously overlooked. Over time, this combination of resilience, stronger boundaries, and deeper faith creates a powerful form of inner strength. The chosen one becomes less dependent on circumstances remaining comfortable in order to move forward. Stability is no longer the only condition that allows progress. Instead, the chosen one develops the ability to move with purpose, regardless of changing environments. What once felt like the loss of comfort gradually reveals itself as the beginning of personal transformation. The challenges that once seemed disruptive become the experiences that built the foundation for greater clarity and independence. By the time this stage fully unfolds, the chosen one often realizes something important. The removal of comfort did not weaken them. It revealed strengths that had been waiting quietly beneath the surface. And as those strengths continue to grow, the chosen one becomes prepared for a new stage of the journey, one where the direction of life begins to align more clearly with the purpose that was being prepared all along. As the chosen one grows stronger through the development of inner resilience, something remarkable begins to take shape. The uncertainty that once felt overwhelming slowly loses its power. The decisions that once required hesitation now come with greater clarity. The strength that developed quietly through difficult seasons begins to influence how the future is perceived. At this stage of the journey, the chosen one begins to notice a shift in perspective. The experiences that once seemed scattered and confusing start forming a pattern. Moments that once felt like random disruptions begin to connect in ways that were impossible to see before. This realization introduces the chosen one to a profound truth. The removal of comfort was never random. When the earlier stages of the journey were unfolding, it was easy to believe that events were happening without clear direction. A relationship ended unexpectedly. A familiar opportunity disappeared. An environment that once felt stable slowly lost its sense of belonging. At the time, each of these moments may have appeared disconnected from one another, but as the chosen one moves further along the path, a deeper understanding begins to emerge. The changes that once felt like isolated events now reveal themselves as part of a larger redirection. Each shift quietly moved the chosen one away from circumstances that no longer aligned with the next stage of growth. What once looked like loss begins to look more like preparation. The environments that disappeared were often the ones that could not sustain the future that was forming. The opportunities that closed were sometimes paths that would have led the chosen one further away from their deeper purpose. Even the relationships that changed direction may have been part of a necessary separation that allowed personal development to continue. At first, these changes may have felt abrupt or confusing, but with time, their meaning becomes easier to recognize. The chosen one begins to see that life was quietly guiding them towards something that could not exist within the boundaries of their previous comfort. This realization often brings a sense of calm that was not present during the earlier stages of the journey. The uncertainty that once created anxiety now appears as a natural part of transformation. What once seemed like instability now feels like movement towards something meaningful. Gradually, the new path begins to reveal itself. This revelation does not always appear as one dramatic moment. More often, it unfolds through a series of smaller recognitions. The chosen one may notice that the environments they now encounter feel more aligned with their values. Conversations may begin to revolve around ideas that resonate more deeply. Opportunities may appear that encourage growth rather than simply maintaining comfort. The difference between the old path and the new one becomes increasingly clear. In the earlier season, stability may have existed without a strong sense of direction. Life may have been predictable, but not necessarily fulfilling in a deeper sense. Now the chosen one begins to experience something different. The direction of life may still require effort and courage, but it carries a sense of meaning that was previously missing. The path forward begins to feel purposeful rather than merely comfortable. New relationships may also begin to appear during this stage. These connections often feel different from those of earlier seasons. Instead of reinforcing familiar patterns, they encourage growth, awareness, and mutual understanding. Conversations may feel more aligned with the deeper questions that now guide the chosen one's life. These relationships do not always replace the old ones directly. Instead, they often represent a different type of connection, one that reflects the transformation that has taken place. The chosen one begins to recognize that the people who enter their life now are often aligned with the direction their journey is taking. Opportunities also begin to shift in noticeable ways. Paths that once seemed unreachable may suddenly appear accessible. Situations that once seemed unlikely may begin to unfold naturally. What once required constant struggle may begin to flow with greater ease because the chosen one is now moving within an environment that supports their growth. At this point, it becomes easier to understand why the earlier stages of disruption were necessary. Remaining in the previous environment might have prevented these opportunities from appearing. The comfort that once surrounded life may have kept the chosen one anchored in a space that could not support the future that was waiting. When viewed from this perspective, the earlier challenges take on a new meaning. The loss of comfort was not simply an obstacle to endure, it was a doorway that needed to open in order for the next chapter to begin. The chosen one often realizes that the new path was always waiting, even during the moments when it seemed invisible. While life appeared uncertain, unseen preparations were quietly unfolding. The skills developed during difficult seasons, the awareness gained through reflection, and the resilience formed through challenge were all preparing the chosen one for the direction that is now becoming clear. What once felt like disruption gradually becomes the beginning of a more meaningful chapter. The chosen one begins to see that purpose rarely appears instantly. It reveals itself through a process of preparation that unfolds over time. Each stage of the journey contributes something necessary. The comfort that once provided stability allowed early development to take place. The disruptions that followed created separation from limiting environments. The uncertainty that emerged strengthened faith and awareness. The inner strength that developed through challenge created the resilience needed for what comes next. All of these stages were part of the same journey, and as the chosen one continues moving forward, the path that once seemed uncertain begins to carry a quiet sense of direction. The future may still contain challenges, but it no longer feels disconnected from purpose. Instead, each step forward feels like part of a larger, unfolding story. What once felt like the removal of comfort now appears as the beginning of alignment. The path that was always waiting has finally begun to reveal itself. After walking through every stage of this journey, from the illusion of stability to the development of inner strength and the discovery of a new path, the chosen one eventually reaches a moment of reflection. The experiences that once felt confusing begin to align into a clearer understanding. What once looked like scattered disruptions slowly reveals itself as a carefully unfolding process. The journey that began with the removal of comfort now begins to show its deeper meaning. For the chosen one, the removal of comfort is rarely meaningless. At the beginning of the process, it can feel sudden and even unfair. The loss of familiar routines, the distance from certain relationships, and the disappearance of environments that once felt secure can create the impression that something has gone wrong. It may feel as though stability itself is slipping away without explanation. But as time passes and perspective grows, many chosen ones begin to see these moments differently. The experiences that once seemed like obstacles begin to reveal themselves as preparation. The doors that closed were not necessarily meant to remain open forever. In many cases, those doors belonged to seasons that had already fulfilled their purpose. Life has a way of guiding people through transitions that are not always easy to understand in the moment. When familiar structures begin to change, it can create a sense of instability. Yet within that instability lies the possibility of transformation. The closing of one chapter often creates the space needed for another chapter to begin. What feels like disruption may actually be preparation. The chosen one may not immediately see the value of the changes that are taking place. During the early stages of uncertainty, it is natural to focus on what has been lost, rather than what might still be forming ahead. The human mind tends to interpret sudden changes as setbacks because it prefers the security of what is known. However, many people eventually discover that the seasons which once felt most uncomfortable were also the seasons that redirected their lives in the most meaningful ways. The moments when comfort disappeared were often the same moments when deeper awareness began to grow. The loss of familiar surroundings forced reflection, strengthened faith, and created the space necessary for new possibilities to emerge. Looking back, many chosen ones recognize that the most difficult seasons of their lives were also the ones that revealed their true direction. Without those moments of disruption, they might have remained within environments that limited their growth. Without those periods of uncertainty, they might never have discovered the strength and clarity that now guide their decisions. What once felt like the end of stability gradually reveals itself as the beginning of alignment. If you are experiencing a time when comfort is fading and life feels uncertain, it is important to remember that this stage does not necessarily signal the collapse of your path. Sometimes it signals the opposite. Sometimes it means that life is moving you toward a level of clarity that could not exist within your previous circumstances. The chosen one often encounters their greatest growth during the moments when the familiar begins to disappear. When the structures that once defined life begin to shift, new awareness begins to take shape. The questions that arise during these seasons lead to deeper understanding. The challenges that appear along the way strengthen the resilience needed for the next chapter. The journey of the chosen one often begins exactly where comfort ends. The path forward may not always reveal itself immediately, but each step taken with faith and awareness contributes to a larger unfolding story. Over time, the chosen one begins to see that the changes they once feared were actually guiding them toward a life that carries greater meaning and purpose. If this message encouraged you today, remember to like the video, share it with someone who may need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more spiritual insights about the path of the chosen ones.